Welcome to the Main Character Podcast. I am your host, Brandon Hamblin, main character of my own story. But this podcast isn't about me. It's about you, and all of you. Every person that has ever lived on this planet, all 8 billion people here now, all that came before us, and all that will come hereafter are the main characters in their own story. My aim is to interview people that embody living in their energy and discovering from their perspective what their perception of reality is like. Buckle up. You're about to experience the world through another main character's eyes.
I've had this book idea probably for 10 years at this point, but at least say 8 years, where I had this concept I call Integral Naturalism.
Oh, okay. Tell me more.
So naturalism is the philosophy that gave birth to the scientific method.
Yes.
But it makes one unfortunate assumption.
Okay.
That there is a difference between natural and supernatural. So it basically defines the natural world as the material world, which is measurable and quantifiable.
Yep.
And anything that's not material is therefore supernatural / superstitious.
Yep.
And that's why that realm doesn't tend to get studied by science. It's not because science can't study it.
Right.
It's because it doesn't fit into naturalistic philosophy.
Right.
So my idea of integral naturalism is, why don't we reintegrate that missing part, and not in a childish sort of superstitious way, but with a mature scientific lens.
Right.
And I'm not the first to think of this idea. I'm just giving it that title.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of Dr. Dean Radin, who's written several books that are really good. This is what he's been doing for over 40 years.
Right.
He's a laboratory scientist studying psychic phenomena.
Which is pretty cool.
He's got incredible data. And I think his most recent book was about magic.
Ah, lovely.
So before that, he was more interested in Eastern spiritual traditions.
Yeah. And
sort of, like I said, the more laboratory controlled psychic phenomena such as remote viewing and precognition.
Yep.
Then he, I think, started to become familiar with the Western magical tradition and realized that it had names for a lot of the phenomena he was already studying.
Yes, indeed.
And I'll say, in my own life, it's been an interesting, when I was in school, you have a very different perspective on life when you're in school versus in business. Very
much so. Very much so.
Living on student loans doesn't. There's I think of the planet Saturn.
Yeah.
Like the planet Saturn is all like discipline and the weight of time and aging, and it's like you feel like you're suspended a little bit outside of Saturn's grasp when you're in school.
Yeah.
Living in a little bit of a dream world.
Yeah.
Maybe it's Jupiter's domain. So everything's about philosophy and thinking. And then when you get into the real world, it's like, no, here's some hard facts that you have been avoiding.
Yes. Yeah.
But
that's
all
well
that
said.
is to say is through myself studying a little bit of the Western magical tradition, it's actually helped me reignite my interest in Christianity, which, having grown up Catholic, I had at times a good relationship with, but then felt basically the institution and those involved in it were unwilling to try to answer what I thought were the most interesting questions.
Right.
And
I think they have a lot of those answers and they don't want to give them to the masses.
Well, and so I'll come back. That tradition, what really interests me about it now is they have a whole highly developed system of demonology.
Yes.
Spirit possession and how to deal with that.
Right.
And that doesn't get publicized a lot, except for in maybe, Hollywood movies that are a little bit,
right.
What should I say?
Well, they're commercialized and dumbed down and oversimplified.
But also sensationalized.
Very sensationalized. Yes.
Right. So I think they I believe it's 10 levels they have of different like increasing levels of possession.
Right.
And the beginning levels are things that a lot of people have experienced. It's just like bad luck. Like a string of bad luck can be just a spirit messing with you, right?
Right.
If it gets worse, it might be more like poltergeist phenomena where stuff starts falling off the counters.
Speaking of Hollywood, one of my favorite movies, Poltergeist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but it's very well delineated. Now, myself growing up, going to church and going through confirmation classes and everything where you actually, so first you go through your first communion. So you get trained for that, where you get first the Eucharist,
Okay.
And then you go through confirmation.
What age is that at?
I think it was like 13.
Okay.
Were you first? And then around 16, I think you go through confirmation, which they say is when you become an adult in the church. You choose the church.
Yeah.
But you go through a lot of weekly training to understand what all of that means.
Right.
But these kind of subjects never come.
No.
What they go over is just, they literally call it the dogma of the church, right? Like a lot of it's not really Bible study.
No. Well, and I'm curious because is that one of those things where, again, for the general community of the church, we're just going to like surface level, here's this and the dogma of, and then if you're going to pursue the priesthood, then you're going to deep dive into more of that. And depending on the level that you reach within what is that called? The priesthood hierarchy, the papal something. I'm sure there's a term for it that I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
Okay.
Obviously, I wouldn't know firsthand.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Didn't choose that path.
Didn't go down that path.
But yeah, I guess for me, what I started finding interesting as a teenager was, where do science and spirituality overlap?
Yeah. Well, and isn't the Catholic Church, and maybe it's not the Catholic Church, but the church, at that point I think it would have been Catholic, was responsible for science more or less becoming a course of study to try and prove out.
That's interesting. So that there's definitely a history where they intertwine, and then clearly periods where
they're
the
at
church
odds.
Tries to assert authority about a certain dogma that is contradicted scientifically.
Right.
So where should I start with that?
Well, okay, so let me do some setup, because there's like 10 different branches we already could have gone down, which is amazing. So, and I'm trying to remember how much I set you up in general for the podcast. So my main theme here is just like, what makes you, right? Mm-hmm. I'm just fascinated by, why does everybody see the world the way that they do? What were your experiences growing up, going through school, all the things that have led to where you're at today. And obviously you are very well studied, very intellectual. You are very curious by nature. And so you've gone down a lot of paths. One of the things that I love is Rachel knew you before I did. And she's like, you got to talk to David. You got to talk to David. And one of the points that she made is, you guys are going to end up having these fascinating conversations. And I just want to be fly on the wall. And I have had multiple conversations, and I can keep up with most people. You because of all the things you've studied, sometimes you say things that I'm like, that is a subject that I like, maybe surface level. And so I have a feeling on some of the subjects we talk about today, we're going to kind of have to bring the audience along on some of those points.
Yeah.
Because Again, I'm so fascinated by everybody, but I am especially fascinated by you,
I
David.
Appreciate that.
So maybe let's set the groundwork a little bit. What was your childhood like? What was your initial, your family being Catholic? How did that shape your initial view of the world? And then we'll go from there, and then we'll deep dive into some of the topics.
Well, you mentioned childhood. I've always been a weird kid.
Okay.
I still think of myself as a weird kid.
Yeah.
Or maybe I should mention, I practice acupuncture. I have a doctorate in Oriental medicine. When I was younger, I didn't think that would be the path I would take.
Right.
Now that I'm here, it's something I love doing. I have other projects that I'm always thinking of all the time, but I do find it fascinating every time that I can help someone using such a, I guess, a poetic form of medicine,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term.
It's not brute force like Western medicine where it's, here's your diagnosis, take
Right.
this.
And I always tell people, drugs and surgeries save lives.
Yeah.
But you probably want to minimize the number that you need.
Yes.
Because they come with big risk.
And maybe don't get to a point where you're taking 4, 8, 16 medications a day.
Yeah. I mean, I always, at this point, I'm old enough to know that sometimes the cards that were dealt to someone, you know, are what they are.
Right.
And I can't reverse everything. But, you know, there's foundations of health that have to be there too.
Yep.
But at the same time, what drew me to Chinese medicine was my experiences with it. But I will say, so sorry, going back to childhood.
Yeah, because we will definitely touch
why
on.
Why am I a weird kid? Well,
on your
the
profession.
First kind of questions I remember really asking is like, what's the smallest bit of matter and what's the smallest unit of time?
Okay. So, how old were you when you're asking these questions?
Not very old.
Okay. All right.
And I had a fascination with, especially how finely can we dice time, basically.
Yeah.
Right? So, you know, like movies are generally shot, I think it's in 28 or 24 frames per second.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about that rate that is more natural to the eye.
Right.
Most cell phone cameras either do 30 or 60 frames a second. Same with television. Now some televisions are going up to 120. The more frames you have, all things being equal, meaning the same resolution per image, you're going to have a crisper image because you're going to have less change between the images.
Right.
And therefore sharper movement and smoother movement. But then the question becomes like, well, is it infinite? Like, is time infinitely divisible?
Yep.
I didn't know the answer to that question.
What made you curious about it?
Weird things like when you turn a light on and you can watch it. There's a split second before it actually comes on.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was very young, I was like, well, is that the speed of light?
Yeah.
But no, it's the speed of the element heating up.
Right.
I realized later.
Yeah.
Right. So because the electricity is almost immediate, it actually does come on at about the speed of light.
Right.
But then the element has to heat up to the point where it can actually emit light.
Right.
Obviously, our eyes are not good enough to capture
that. Right.
Not in that distance.
But that's such a cool, especially at a young age, thing to recognize and go, okay, hold on. There's more here. I need information.
Mm-hmm.
Like what is this?
So it turns out there is a limit.
Okay.
So they call it the Planck length. There's a Planck duration of time and a Planck length in space that is at least as far as quantum physics has gone, has, for all intents and purposes, proven that things are not any further divisible.
Okay.
However, before quantum physics, we have more of a Newtonian sort of framework, which is where calculus works.
We had a cat interruption, folks. We're back on.
So in calculus, you do use infinite divisibility,
okay,
great derivatives and integrals.
Right.
So it's interesting because in high school, I took calculus and I thought that answered my question.
Okay.
To some degree.
Yeah.
Mathematically, you can use infinities to answer questions.
Right.
But it turns out in physics, you can't. Not in this arena. You can't infinitely divide.
Right.
But that sort of raises an interesting question. Why does reality have a frame rate? Why does reality basically have a pixel length?
Yeah. So, that's a really good question.
Some people
does that prove that we're in the Matrix? I mean,
well, that's what some people say, is
right.
That shows we're in a simulation. And my answer to that is always, what would the difference be? So if you
really
take reality to be a simulation, how does that make it different for you?
Right.
From what it already was.
Right. Are you taking it any less seriously?
Right.
Are you, how is it changing the way that you do life?
So I'm pretty confident at this point. I've studied a bit of the near-death experience literature, so I'm pretty confident consciousness lives before and after the body, or exists before and after the body.
Yeah.
So I would say, traditionally that was called the soul. So I believe in that everyone has a soul.
Yeah.
I would also argue so does every living thing, maybe even things we think are inanimate.
Yeah.
But at least humans do, for sure, because we have the stories of people who've come back.
Right.
And they've seen things they shouldn't have been able to.
Well, it's so interesting that you bring that up. Do you remember meeting John Anderson? You remember John Anderson? We had cigars with him in August.
Okay. Yeah.
He was on Friday, and that was one of his major awakening points.
Yeah.
Was he goes, he had a near-death experience, and he studied hundreds of near-death experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And the point that he was making was, oh my gosh, almost everybody, right? Some people end up seeing something less than pleasing, but that's probably due to their belief system and the way that they've been living their life. But most it's love. You see people, family members, whatever it is. And none of them come back and live life the same way, right?
Oh, I imagine you wouldn't be able to.
No. But to your point, it is confirmation that, your soul, your consciousness before and after it's not just this life.
So that turns the whole question of consciousness on its head.
Yes.
So it also points to the fact that this life, material existence, incarnation, whatever you want to call it, isn't all there is. There's a bigger reality that it lives inside of.
Right.
Which is not that different than saying it's a simulation.
Right.
So the Gnostics pointed this out. And, Gnosticism at times was popular in Christianity.
Yes. Especially early on.
It's entirely Christian. I don't know that whether or not you could say Jesus would agree with it entirely, but my perspective is I don't think he would disagree with it entirely.
Right.
It's also really what the Vedic texts mean by Maya, right? An illusion, or as Alan Watts likes to translate it, play.
Play.
Like we're playing a part here.
Well, I'm in the middle of reading the book by Alan Watts.
Yeah.
And I love how he puts that God is playing hide and go seek with himself.
Mm-hmm.
It's to me, it's a beautiful way of illustrating it.
Yeah. There's, what's the artist's name? Akira the Dawn. Have you heard of him?
Oh, no.
He takes lectures and puts them to music.
Oh, brilliant.
And he has a whole series called Watts Wave. They're Alan Watts lectures.
That's great.
And I think it's number 4. There's one that I really like.
Yeah, okay.
And one of the songs is where he gets to the sort of climax of his lecture, and he goes, Atman is Brahman.
Oh,
and what that means is your personal soul or personal self is one with the oversoul or God, basically.
Yeah.
Right? And I think there's truth to that. I also think it's more complicated than that.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I've been toying around with, because coming from the Mormon perspective, there was a very clear hierarchy, right? There's God, and then in the LDS realm, there's a heavenly mother. They begat spirit children. Then they put those spirit children into, earth bodies. And then when you die, you're rolling back up, basically.
What about the angels and archangels? Are they not in the Mormon tradition?
They're there, but some of them are spirit children that have not become embodied yet.
Okay.
And so they're here to assist in some way, shape, or form. And some of them are beings that have been here that haven't gone through judgment and been, because that's the other LDS belief, is you get your body back. A perfected version of it. And so that's where I came from. And then it was, okay, there's still God, there's still source, there's still something greater than me, but it's no longer this flesh and bone God. And I'm a fractal of it, or I'm a part of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then with the Alan Watts kind of that was my latest aha of, we're all just part of the same thing. And is there a great, this one singular God sort thing that is greater than me, or is it all just the same thing? And so I'm glad you're bringing this up, because where do you land? What's the I mean, it feels like that's where you were that's what you were alluding to.
I guess I'm comfortable leaving certain things to be a mystery.
Yeah, that's well said.
I used to have stronger beliefs.
Yeah.
But I think mystery is more appropriate for the divine. Because I think that, especially if we try to put it into language, we're going to be wrong.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Yeah.
So,
and there's a reason we don't know or don't remember.
Yeah. And when I was in college, I actually studied English literature as my major and creative writing, but I got a minor by accident in anthropology because I loved it so much.
Oh, I love it.
And the main thing I wanted to study was religions and spiritual practices, belief systems.
Yeah. Now, had you left the Catholic faith tradition at that point? Were you still, was it the basis, the foundation? Where are you at in that point in the process?
So in high school, I got into meditation and kind of aligned mostly with a Zen Buddhist perspective.
Okay.
Because it had the least dogma. So what I liked about Zen Buddhism is there is literally nothing to believe in. Like, the core tenet is, if you practice, you'll eventually understand.
Yeah.
If you understand, you don't need it explained.
Right. Right.
If you don't understand, you won't understand the explanation.
Right.
So there's nothing to do but practice.
Right.
And that's it.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
So the framework is super simple. And actually doing it is the hard part.
Right. You have to practice it. Now, I mean, that's a pretty big swing from. So then, were you at any point what you would consider strict Catholic? And it doesn't sound like your family was.
So my mom is still very involved in the Catholic Church.
Okay. Yeah.
And I go to church with her when she's visiting, or I'm visiting her.
Yeah.
I actually like the ritual of the Mass.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they keep changing little pieces of it,
right?
Which I always think make it worse.
Yeah.
I don't think they've ever done a change that I thought, wow, that made it better. No, it's like they always make they change the language in ways that makes it less clear. Like, I'll give you an example.
Yeah, please.
Growing up, it was always peace be with you. And then the congregation responds, and also with you.
Yeah.
Straightforward.
Yep.
Now the priest says, peace be with you. So now the priest says, peace be with you. The congregation is supposed to say, and also with your spirit. And I don't like that response.
Yeah.
Because why does it have to only be with your spirit?
Right. You're getting a little bit more definitive.
Yeah. It's narrowing the piece down to only being given to a certain aspect of your being, not your totality.
Yeah. It's an
I don't know.
interesting.
I just thought it was weird. And it's more wordy and there's less of a ease of flow to it, in my opinion. So maybe I'm nitpicking. I don't really deserve to have a say since I'm not really a practicing Catholic, but it's like the Nicene Creed was changed, which is basically the profession of belief.
Right.
And all the changes I feel like are so awkward.
Right.
Anyways, it's just my opinion, but
and that's when you get, if you study the Nicene Creed or the Great Schism or Protestantism or especially in the Christian vein, and you just go, what? Man, we're getting, again, we're adding in all these little pieces that fractures everything, divides people, when kind of the point to me is, I like that you like studying religions, because to me, and still going to Mass when your mom's in town, because if something is a dedicated space, a dedicated belief to tapping into the divine,
right?
And that could be a Mormon temple, that could be a Catholic church, that could be, I could go over to a Buddhist temple, I could go to, name the religion, name the belief, name the thing. If it is a space that is set apart to worship and to connect and to meditate, it's holy space.
Sure.
And the theologies behind them and all the dogma behind them I may not agree with, but the intent is beautiful.
And I think, so I really like the local church here.
Yeah.
They
It's
have
beautiful.
a beautiful pipe organ.
Yeah.
And there's something when sound really resonates in your body.
Oh, well,
It's a different experience than just saying the words. You know what I mean?
right. Well, I think I say it every time on this podcast. Energy is information that vibrates. And when you tones and vibrations, and especially from something powerful like a pipe organ, it gets every part of you. I shared this on the last one, and I think the number's fascinating. I think you'll think it's fascinating because we were talking about how divisible can something get. When you split an atom, something pretty, devastatingly powerful happens.
Yeah.
Right. Your body is made of 7 octillion atoms.
Right.
That's 7 with 27 zeros after it. It's a number that we can't even fathom. That pipe organ is interacting with the vibration of each one of those atoms. No wonder it's a powerful thing that you enjoy.
Well, and resonance is interesting too.
Right.
So, like certain wavelengths pass through us without changing anything.
Right.
Whereas other wavelengths resonate and actually stir things up in us.
Yeah.
And that's true of the electromagnetic spectrum. It's true of, sound waves.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think they do different things to us. There's a reason why you can listen to acoustic music and still have emotions stir in you, right?
Right.
You don't need the lyrics to tell you what to feel.
Right. Are we playing in a minor key? Are we in a major key? Are we are we fast? Are we slow? Are we God, it's my I like to think it's a gift, but the way that I end up seeing the world and interacting is primarily through music.
Yeah.
And so it's all the things that you just said.
Well, and that's so I actually thought of this a little bit. The Vedic perspective is that, basically the world came into existence from sound waves.
Yeah. Well, you could even argue that's
sound.
the Christian perspective too.
So that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
In the beginning was the word.
Right.
But see, before writing, that meant to intone a sound.
Yes.
So yeah, I think there's a lot more connections between religions than people think. It's almost like you have to kind of, well, first you have to realize that things have been translated probably multiple times.
Yes.
And so the language that's gotten chosen is not necessarily the entire original meaning.
Yes.
It's one possible version.
Right.
And so, yeah, sometimes you do have to kind of bend the word a little bit to see where it lines up. And then you go like, oh, maybe these all came from an older story.
Yeah.
So like even in Taoism, which wasn't actually a religion, it was a philosophy, it became quasi-religious after Buddhism came to China.
Right.
But there's a line in the Tao Te Ching that says, basically, in the beginning was the Tao, which the Tao roughly translates to the way, almost like you can use the word road even in English. And then it says from the way generated the one generated the two, and the two generated the three.
Yeah. From
the three came the 10,000 things, or everything.
Right.
All the myriad things.
Yeah.
However you want to. But it's literally 10,000 in the text. But if you think about that, it's not that different from a lot of other creation myths.
Right.
And why 1, 2, 3? 1 is the total divine unity of the cosmos. 2 is the opposition of polar opposites.
Right.
So you can say the original 2 might be like space and time, but ultimately what we get is like space and energy is the one we normally look at. So the darkness of space, the brightness of energy.
Yeah.
Energy also coalesces into matter, and then you have the opposite of matter and energy. Doesn't really matter. You can divide it however you want. But once you have two things in opposition, you can create a third thing. And that third thing is information.
Yeah.
And in fact, the line in the Tao Te Ching says that, I'm not going to remember it perfectly, but it's something about yang must shoulder yin or lift yin, and yin must enfold yang for there to, which then creates qi. Why is that important? Because qi is not just vital energy; it's information. Because what are they talking about when they say that? Well, if you look at the I Ching, which is the original binary code, the oldest Chinese text, it's lines that are solid and lines that are broken.
Right.
Solid lines are yang, broken lines are yin. Well, you could look at those as ones and zeros.
Yeah.
And I actually translated the original 8 trigrams of the I Ching in the Fuxi. The original creator of that system is Fuxi, considered a legendary king or whatever. By the way, he was said to have red hair. They did find red-haired mummies in the Gobi Desert.
Yeah.
But that's another story.
Well, we'll circle back on that.
So if you translate it to binary code, it's 76543210. It literally counts down.
Isn't that interesting?
In perfect succession. Do you think that's an accident?
No, of course not.
Right. So they knew binary code.
Right.
And
circling back to the Matrix.
I don't even know how old, because the original text wouldn't exist any longer.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Fuxi is said to have been around many thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
So, what are we talking about here? Well, I'll tell you my...
Yeah, please. What's your interpretation? What's it all mean?
I used to joke that I was a Gaelic Taoist when I was in Chinese medicine school. Then I read a paper that argued the original I Ching was written in Gaelic.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because the Chinese characters that are used to name the trigrams are not the Chinese words that you'd normally translate to mean those things.
Okay.
They're specifically characters that are used to transliterate, meaning approximate the sound of another language. And the person writing the paper argued that it seemed to be Gaelic that they were approximating. So now if you think about the red-haired mummies in the Gobi Desert wearing plaid wool shawls, and then you go like...
Are you saying everything comes from the Irish?
Well, but who were these people?
Yeah.
So where did they learn binary code?
Right.
Well, my argument is they learned it in ancient Egypt. This is why they ended up in the Gobi Desert.
Yeah.
So maybe this circles back around to Christianity.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't just Moses who left during the war in Egypt.
Right. Why would it be?
There was a civil war.
Right.
Other groups also left.
Yes.
So Moses and what became known as the Israelites left in one direction, but there were other groups who left. Queen Scota left. She ended up in they say who was the founder of Scotland.
Yeah. I don't know the story.
There's legends that she also ended up in the Americas for a time.
Oh.
And there's caves in the Grand Canyon that if you try to get to them, black helicopters will
show
up.
You can't go there.
And some have argued that's because there's Egyptian artifacts.
Well, yeah.
They found Egyptian artifacts in Ireland and Scotland as well.
Yeah.
And that's always been a legend, is that there's bloodlines that come from there. Now, I don't think those people were the original inhabitants.
Right.
But maybe they were one of the groups, because at the time, Egypt was the greatest empire that had ever been.
Right. And the stat that blows my mind is the Great Pyramids are Cleopatra is closer to our time than the construction of the Great Pyramids. So when you're thinking about that, and then and our history of Egypt is basically we come at peak Egypt. And so there's all of this time frame before then that we don't know.
Well, in the geologists who look at the pyramids and the Sphinx and the other major monuments, they say there's no way that this erosion happened in a desert.
No. Well, the Sphinx has water erosion.
A massive deluge of water.
Yes.
Well, what does that mean?
Right.
Because it's a desert right now.
Right now. But it used to be lush.
Well, when was it lush? When did it have a massive deluge of water?
Yeah.
And that pushes us back to at least 11,000 years.
Yes. Well,
That's
and then you have every 12,000, every 24 to 25,000 years, you have a pole shift or something.
Well, and hopefully we're not coming up on
kind of.
Some of the information I've been reading, I'm like, well, here it goes. All you can do is say your prayers and kiss your family goodnight and hope for the best. That's all we could ever do, actually. That's what it reminds us when we realize there are cycles of time that we don't have control over.
No.
And cataclysms are a real part of Earth's history.
Well,
And, like I used to be worried about global warming.
yeah.
I'm no longer worried about global warming. And the first reason is we've been on the edge of thermonuclear war now for
70 years.
Well, but really on the edge for a couple of years with the war in Ukraine.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And I'm like, look, like you got to pick your priorities.
Right.
And here's the other thing I started realizing about climate change. Even if we are the main driver of it, which I'm not totally convinced of anymore, because I think a lot of it is urban heat islands, solar cycles, cosmic radiation, things that the number of factors you'd have to bring in to really understand the climate. And then that all said, there's stratospheric aerosol injection and human stuff.
Right. We're certainly not helping.
Right. So, but to piece all of that out would be nearly impossible. I mean,
right.
They argue there's models that can, but they can't even model clouds correctly. So, it's hard to really take it all.
Well, and you can add in little details like the magnetic North Pole has shifted.
Yeah.
Unbelievable, crazy amount actually.
So,
and then how does that impact our? There's so many little
and then
factors.
The other thing is, well, growing up, I was always told, well, the deserts are growing, and eventually we won't have enough land to feed the planet.
Right.
Well, it turns out everything's getting greener.
Yes.
With more CO2 in the atmosphere.
Interesting, isn't it? It's almost like the greenery feeds off of it.
So it's kind of like, a lot of the things that were predicted didn't come true.
Right.
They were supposed to have already happened, a lot of these predictions, and they didn't happen.
Thank you, Al Gore.
So I'm not saying it's not a real thing.
Right.
Just on my list of threat priorities, it's nowhere near the top any longer.
Yeah, it's not the priority.
It used to be.
Yeah.
And I still think, clean energy technology is a great idea.
Yeah.
Because I don't like breathing exhaust.
No.
I actually drive an electric car.
Yes.
Because I hate the smell of exhaust.
It's terrible. I love getting into a warm
cheaper.
car in the morning, but when you open up the garage door, turn on the car for a little bit, and then you're walking through the fumes.
Yeah.
It's,
Now, my wife has a gas car.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to rely only on electric
cars.
No.
No.
Because there's limitations.
Yes.
But I drive it every day to work. I've never had an issue.
Right.
Knock on wood. Jeez.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
There's a lot of wood in here. The table is not one of those items, but we're going to, it is wood. Yeah. For all intents and purposes.
Maybe I have grown more superstitious.
Yeah.
Anyways, my point is like, when you look at things like magnetic pole shift and the cataclysms that may or may not go along with them.
Right.
One of them is we're going through the torrid
meteor field.
Yeah, the torrid meteor field.
Yeah.
That's also aligned with a lot of cataclysms in Earth's
right.
past.
You're telling me how many times? Because we know we've been hit.
And we're just beginning to head through that.
Yeah,
again.
that sounds
so. That's interesting.
Like fun.
The sun is going into a grand solar minimum cycle.
Yep.
So that could be helpful if our magnetic field is limited.
Well, yeah, because
there'll be less solar radiation, so it might not totally fry us.
Well, because the solar flares. I mean, we had those amazing aurora borealises a couple months ago, and we've continued to get them, but it's because we're passing the sun every time it's rotating around. We're rotating around it.
That didn't cause more problems.
I was too.
Because there was a lot of people predicting that those solar flares were going to take grids down or take at least telecom down. And, anything that's electronic could have an energy surge and fry our electronics, the components are so small now. The amount of electricity it would take to fry them is virtually nothing. Yeah.
Well, and when we went through the big ones, gosh, what was that, September? I kept track of it. Things like Apple and Verizon and those guys, there were outages. But it wasn't, we didn't lose the power grid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, I'm happy about.
Yes.
But again, this is where I'm like, I've reached a point in my life where I know I can't understand everything.
Right.
And even the people who are experts in the fields can't get to the very bottom, right? Like, no one can reach the Planck length. Understanding.
Yeah, good pullback. Yeah.
So ultimately, like I will say I used to rely more on meditation when I was younger. Now
Okay.
I rely more on prayer.
What do you consider the difference?
Prayer has generally words.
Okay.
Meditation doesn't. That's basically the only
Yep.
difference.
Okay.
Now, I do get into a meditative state if I'm going to really say a prayer.
Yeah.
Because I'm actively trying to connect to a higher power.
Okay. Yep.
And I can feel that in my body.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the result of meditation, is that I'm sensitive to the energies in my body.
Yeah.
That's why maybe I also like practicing acupuncture, because I'm sensitive to the energies in other people's bodies.
Right.
So I can feel things that not everyone has developed a sensitivity
It says,
to.
yeah. Yep.
And I would say my basic framework is pretty much every religion says the heart is the seat of the soul,
Yeah.
and it's where the divine reaches into it. So I take that as pretty much a fact.
Yeah.
So if you want to pray, learn to pray from the heart, not from the head.
Yeah. It's
And
good
it's
advice.
a different place in the body that you're praying from, and you feels different.
Yes.
The head is more like it, in Chinese medicine, they call it the palace of intellect, which is great. It's great at recursion. It's great at logic. It's not a great leader, right? They say the rational mind is a great servant and a terrible master.
Yes.
It's in Jordan Peterson likens that to Lucifer.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
the rational mind is the devil on our shoulder in a way.
Yeah.
Like, because rationality can lead you to commit horrible, horrific things.
Oh, it's so easy to rationalize. Yeah. If we take out these people, then it keeps us safe.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Your
Well-
heart's telling you just killed somebody.
Which is so. In here, I'll come back to why I think Christianity is such a radical idea.
Yeah.
Radical forgiveness.
Yes.
That's what Jesus taught. Forgive, love your enemy,
Yes.
turn the other cheek. These are crazy ideas.
Crazy.
No one taught that.
No,
before.
because our intellect and our biology dictate might mix right.
And that's how it always was. At
Yes.
least in written history.
Right.
And I will say, even in the Vedic tradition, the gods were often brutal warriors.
Yeah.
And I can say, if life's just a play, maybe that's just the part they had to play that time around.
Yes.
But there's nothing been more radical than total unrestricted and unqualified forgiveness
Yeah.
of everyone.
Yep.
Total love.
It-
It's what got him crucified.
yes.
I mean, it's still, there's actually I've gone through a lot of different periods of life. I went through one where I listened to Marilyn Manson, and there's a line he has.
Of all the things you're going to say today, David, that is, I did not have that on the bingo card. That was not
there's
there.
a line where he says, if Jesus came back, you'd crucify him again.
It's true, though.
I mean, and how many times would it take before we really learned?
Oh, man.
I guess that's what fascinates me, to come back to it, is like, I get bummed out by church dogma at this point,
Yeah.
but I'm also adult enough to understand that, like, it's just how institutions operate.
Yes.
Like, you can't, but I shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Right.
There is a real singular wisdom in the figure of Jesus Christ. And I'm not even one who would say I think the Bible is the full story of his life,
Yes.
or totally accurate even. But that all aside, it's clear what he was teaching.
Yes.
And I think I have yet to see any teaching that I could say, oh, this is pretty much the same.
Right.
The closest is Buddhism.
Well, and I was just going to ask, right? Because we have all of these historical religious figures like Jesus, like Buddha.
Well, there's multiple Buddhas, though, so it's a little different. Yeah.
Correct, right. Or you could even say Muhammad, right? All these
Mhm.
that are giving some kind of philosophy, but like did you just say he's a singular figure? I think that was the phrasing you used. And it is because of that radical teaching of love everybody.
And
Forgive.
what I'll say about that is, even in ancient Egypt, which I come back to a lot because, well, I mean, I think it's a huge part of human history. I think
And
it
it's
was
still
a
an
hub.
active part of human history. Look
Yeah.
at your dollar bill, folks. You got a pyramid with an all-seeing eye on it. Where do you think that came from? It's look at
Well,
our.
there are pyramids on every continent too.
Oh, there's
And
that
that's
too.
another story about how did that happen? And how
Well,
did
and
they
with
move-
LiDAR and the amount of places that they're finding, oh,
How did
gosh.
they move stone, perfectly carved pieces of stone that were, tens or hundreds of tons? Stones
It's
that we can't move today. with
no,
our
that we
equipment.
cannot recreate
Yeah.
with our modern technology. Okay,
That's a different story.
because
So-
I have a feeling that's going to take us down some Atlantean stuff and some other stuff, and I want to touch
So at
on.
least at some point in Egyptian theology, and which I don't know that well, but what I do know is there was an idea that resentment was the ultimate sin or the source of all sin.
Yeah,
And I really like that because when we hold a grudge or we resent someone or something, people have even said, right, it's like drinking poison and hoping the other person will
yeah,
die.
yes,
Well, why is that? So what I physically feel is that resentment shuts the heart. It's
yeah,
almost like, and it feels almost physical, like there's a pressure over the center of the chest.
Yeah.
Well, why is that important? Because that cuts us off from the divine.
yeah,
And well, what does that mean? Well, here's my current perspective is when you're in contact with the divine, what humans call that is the feeling of love.
yeah,
So you can find that in another person and have a love in a relationship. It doesn't even have to be sexual, but it can be, whatever. It just means you're experiencing that connection.
yeah.
You can
Your
connect
heart centers
from
are
one to the other.
yeah connected.
But you can also, if you open yourself widely enough to that, it will flow through you regardless of the.
Right,
But the one thing you can't do is hold a grudge.
right.
You have to forgive,
Yeah,
because as soon as you hold a resentment or a grudge,
you close it off.
once you forgive, it starts to open again.
Yeah,
So this is why that was such a radical teaching, because it's not just that forgiveness would make the world a better place, which it would.
yes. That would
Right.
be the byproduct.
In my opinion, you can look at Israel today and say, wow, if those two sides could just learn to forgive each other, wouldn't that
Gosh.
be a better place?
Yep.
But our country has its own issues. We're manufacturing weapons for the world and getting involved in a lot of things we shouldn't.
Well, and that's the intellect. That's the brain taking over and seeing we gain from this. You're going to put yourself
Well,
in a
if we
better
don't do it,
position.
then someone will.
Right.
We better
Again,
stop them before
the
they get to us.
justification
And
train is
Mhm.
just
once you go down pure logic, anything becomes possible.
yep.
This is why the movie Doctor Strangelove was basically a documentary.
Yes.
People don't understand how many times we've come close to nuclear annihilation.
There's
and
no
these
fighting
people
in the war
really-
room, by the way.
They think
Yeah.
that it's survivable and that we might as well do it because it's going to happen anyway, and
Right.
just build the tunnels and we'll live underground for 30 years. What's the big deal?
Psychotic. Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, man.
Yeah. Can we? Whew. Jeez.
So again, some of these people might even call themselves Christians.
Oh,
I don't know.
Yeah.
But when you start thinking about death on those scales as being reasonable, as
Mhm.
being something you could trigger, I think you have to check in with your heart.
If they still can.
Well, I don't think anyone's beyond redemption.
Well, yeah.
But
I agree
yes,
with that.
once you go down, the further you go down a road of depravity, the harder it is to admit that you've made a bad choice.
Of course. Well, yeah, and ultimately nobody likes to feel like they're wrong. So, yeah, it does get
Yeah.
much harder.
And, do I think this country would be better off without a military? I can't say that it would be.
Well,
'cause
right.
Another military would just come
Well,
in.
it'd be really nice if everybody at the same time was like, yep, this forgiveness thing, this love thing, we're all on board.
Yeah.
Okay, good. We can trust each other. Great.
And it's tough because even that can be exploited by someone who
course.
wants to take power.
Right.
And I mean, I think I used to be pretty neutral on the UN.
Mhm.
And now I think it's really just a criminal organization.
Well, I think the vast
In its
majority of.
founding documents, it literally gives anyone who works in any capacity for the UN total diplomatic immunity globally for all crimes ever committed.
It's kind of madness.
why would you need that kind of immunity?
Right.
It's
Or
a
why would
little
you need to give
weird.
a pardon to somebody that hasn't been charged with a crime?
Well, I won't even open that can of worms. But I'm talking about these people who've had it since World War II. They've had immunity.
Right.
In every government on
Right. They
Earth.
can't be tried.
Mhm. Well, that's a really good way to cover up crime because
Of course.
that you can't even be investigated.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. Anyways,
Well, and I've
but
kind
the
of
idea of a global governing body that where we can go to work out differences, it's a great idea.
it's a great idea.
right. It comes in, and that's how it's like, well, what if it didn't exist and there was no forum for people to talk? Would that be a better world or a worse world? I don't know. But, it's like, how about this? We're at a moment in history where clearly there's going to be some big shit.
Yes, there has to be. We are on the edge. And
Different
back
people talk
back
about
to
it
your-
differently.
well, and back to your point about, you can find truths in all religions and belief systems. Which one of them doesn't feel like we're on the edge of second coming, great awakening, world disaster, nuclear war, pole shift, right? Like go down the belief systems. I don't care. Everybody feels like we are on the edge of something. Something's about to go down.
Yeah. So
I didn't
Where
mean to
go
take
with
you off your
No, it's,
your track.
I'll tell you this. So, like, the Book of Revelations was never something I was interested in previously.
Oh, okay. I would have thought you totally dug it.
Well, I've started to understand. One thing I think about is, like, is this something that happens periodically? Is it not like a singular event?
Okay.
But
Yeah.
a cyclical event.
Yeah.
I'm still not sure what I think about that on that level, but in the Vedic tradition, they have the Yuga cycle.
Mhm.
So in the Greeks, these are what were called the ages or the eons. The Greek system was almost exactly the same as the Vedic system.
Okay.
Just had different names for the eons. Now, they're both based on the precession of the equinoxes.
Yep.
So that's roughly 25,000 year cycle.
Right.
I think it's truly like 24,800 or something. So it's pretty close to 25.
Yeah.
Now, precession means why it's the equinox. Okay, the vernal equinox or the spring equinox is on March 21st every year. That's when day and night are the same.
Yep.
But that's according to what we call the tropical zodiac. That should happen at as soon as the sun enters Aries. So the 0 degree Aries.
Yep.
Which is fine, except that's not where it is anymore.
Oh.
So
Yeah.
it used to be, but it's not.
Where is it now?
Now it's about 45 degrees off from
Okay.
maybe more. I haven't looked in a long time, but say approximately.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the 40 degree range, 40 to 45. Well, why is that? It's shifting backward a very small fraction of a degree every year.
Yep.
That 25,000 year cycle is how long it takes to go all the way around the zodiac and come back to the origin point of 0 degrees.
Yep.
So that easily divides into 12 because we have 12 signs of the zodiac.
Yep.
Which is also why the Sumerian numerical system was based on 12s and why they had better math for geometry than the base 10 system. But
yeah.
that's another story too.
Yep.
Because base 12 actually gives you much more clear answers than base 10.
Oh.
You're looking at trigonometry.
Yeah.
But so the reason there's 360 degrees in a circle is there's 12 signs of the zodiac with 30 degrees each, and that's 360.
Yep.
Geometry. So actually, the original, became astrology, was actually originally called mathematics.
Right.
Because that's where mathematics actually came from, was studying the sky.
Right.
It's also where, a lot of it's sort of the mother science, because people had to derive geometry and mathematics to be able to understand what they were looking at and with the movements of the planetary
Well, and
bodies.
what is it? One lifetime is roughly a 1 degree move, something like that.
Possibly.
So how many I mean, that's the thing that impresses me is everybody up until electricity would have had the most amazing clear night skies.
Right.
Right. And so you're basing, I mean, just stars that the dotting of them across the night sky, you can't even imagine unless you get out into somewhere that's totally devoid of light pollution.
Yeah, the high desert at night
Is
on a new
amazing.
moon, the stars can be so bright they light the ground. It's insane.
I'm shocked I haven't done that yet, but maybe that's a trip you and I need to plan.
Well, there's plenty of desert.
There is plenty, although it's not growing at the rate that we thought it was going to.
Yeah.
But ancient civilizations based everything on the awe that they saw in the night sky, including math.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and here's a weird one for you. Constellation we call Orion seems to be the object of observation of the oldest temples that we've found. So like Göbekli Tepe is actually designed to observe the constellation Orion.
That's cool.
And they believe the reason it was buried and rebuilt multiple times was because
I didn't know it was multiple times.
So as the constellations precessed, they had, because they would usually only stay there, they think in the winter, that's when we can see Orion, or as it may have been Osiris.
Yes.
And this is why there's this story of the Father God in the sky.
Yeah.
And if you look at, like, okay, so anyways, that's a different story. I'm getting sidetracked here.
I know. I'm sorry. I took you off track. Which is good for me because I could have taken you off track about 50 other times already. But I'm going to try and limit it.
Some people, how about this? Some atheists will argue, well, there's no Father God in the sky. And I'm like, well, have you ever seen the constellation Orion?
Right.
And Gordon White, who his podcast is Rune Soup, he's written some great books.
Yeah.
On the Western magical tradition. He says the night sky is all we had on television for about 100,000 years.
Yes. That's a great quote.
Yeah. I love that because, you think about why were people telling so many stories about the stars, and it's like, that's what there was to look at.
Yeah. You aren't around the water cooler. Did you watch Game of Thrones last night? No, it was, did you see the comet or the meteor that streaked across the sky? Did you? So
that's what I was going to get at.
Yeah.
Is the Kali Yuga is ending this year.
Yes. Well, and somebody was just pointing out that,
March.
Yes. And that, Sirius? Something, the way that it's going to line up with the paw of the Sphinx, something on the Sphinx is supposed to reveal something.
Yeah, and maybe that. So Graham Hancock has argued that the major megaliths of the Giza Plateau are a clock, but they're a clock for that time scale.
Yeah.
For these long cycles. That they align with certain constellations. And actually, he says that the three major pyramids align with the stars of Orion's belt.
Of the belt. Yeah.
By the way, the old name for Egypt was Chem. Chem is their name for Osiris. So this is where alchemy comes from.
Oh.
And the ancient knowledge was all held at Alexandria until it was burned.
Yep, until Library of Alexandria was burned.
We're trying to rebuild it these days, I guess.
Well, and that's kind of, God, we have a whole section that we need to cover on AI. Right, you bring in the Library of Alexandria, and that's the first place my mind goes. Is one of these guys on Elon Musk's Doge team is famous for being able to read one of the scrolls from. There's a name on it that I can't, but it was it's basically charcoal at this point, and through AI scanners, he was able to. Was
it Nag Hammadi?
Yeah,
or
I think so.
Maybe it was either Nag
I thought
Hammadi
it started with an H.
Dead Sea Scrolls or something. Yeah, one of those ancient scrolls.
One of those ancient scrolls.
You can't even unravel it because it would turn to dust.
Right. But this kind of ties into all the various religions having basic touch points, right? You can look at the Legend of Gilgamesh and Noah. You can look at there's everybody has a Sky Daddy tradition, right? There's so many commonalities that, to me, we didn't even know how to decipher a ton of stuff until we found the
Rosetta Stone.
The Rosetta Stone,
which is bizarre that someone in the past would write something down in three
different languages. Right.
Why did they do that?
Right. Well, and so then AI seems like this, right? All of the amazing amount of computation, and take all of the information that we have and find the commonalities, computer, please. You and I have talked about how AI very well could be the Antichrist. But at the same time, it also looks like, man, look at the truths that could be revealed. So I'm handing AI off to you, David.
Did you see the AI dilemma?
Maybe at one point. I don't recall.
Anyone who wants to watch it, look it up on YouTube. I think it came out in 2023, so it's kind of old now.
Okay. Oh, it's kind of old. That's considered old. Okay.
It's a presentation. Yep. Well, it's old for AI.
That's true.
It's a presentation by the guys who did The Social Dilemma, which was a documentary on social media and all the problems it's
which
creating.
Is also terrifying.
So they say, well, social media was our first contact with AI. It was curation AI.
Yes.
We were all still producing the content. AI was curating it.
Right.
And it's wreaked untold havoc. Well, I'm not that negative on social media. I think most of the problems are when people try to control it too much. I actually think it can be used responsibly. And if we try to remember the world before social media, I mean, yes, we probably spent a lot more time outside and with our physical friends, but it was a completely different world. I mean, the amount of social change that's available to us now was not there. I mean, maybe that was a better world, but we can't go back. So I don't think it's all negative. Yeah. I do think there are problems. I think most of the problems are in that, like, I think social media should just be chronological. Whatever you follow should come up in chronological order.
Yeah, I could see that.
That would get rid of the problem. So maybe it's the AI curation that's the problem. Well, what is that AI told to do?
Right. Whatever this person is inclined towards, then we're going to feed them more of that. Right. We're going to give them the dopamine hit. We're going to...
Well, not just dopamine. This is what I stopped using Facebook because it just wanted me to fight with people.
Yes.
It would show me content I liked, but it would oftentimes push to the top people who I hardly knew or didn't even know.
With something controversial that you'd interact with.
That I would want to argue with.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't want to argue with these people. I don't even know who the hell they are. I don't care.
Right. Well, and are you going to change their hearts and minds when it's over a keyboard? And I've been meaning to say this at multiple points throughout, and it might be a rabbit hole that we should save for later, but I'm going to throw it out now. You were talking about gifts and being able to tap into feeling other people's energy, right? Mm-hmm. And some of that, I mean, is because of who you are and the way that you've been able to practice that and hone that skill. And I am very much convinced that we as humans would have telepathy if we weren't so afraid of hiding things. But the more and more access, right? Because when it was the Pony Express and you aren't getting your news about Washington, D.C. until a handful of days later, versus now you get on Twitter and the non-chronological curation is here's what's going on with Doge, here's what's going on with the executive orders, here's what's going on with all this stuff, and everybody wants to fight.
I will say, I think X is closer to a chronological.
It is.
Than Twitter was. And then definitely than Facebook. Facebook, the reason I left is because the curation got so limited.
Terrible.
I couldn't see content from things I wanted to see. It was only showing me a handful of people, I guess because I had engaged with them previously, but it's just like, it became like the world shrank to nothing. And I was just done with it. I was bored. I didn't want to put any more time and energy into it. I don't really post much on any platform.
Right.
Because I've gotten to the point where I'm like, all we're doing is feeding AI.
Yeah.
That's all that our content does now. You're not actually having a conversation. You're feeding a beast.
Right. Well,
and what do I mean by this? So here's how deep it goes. Just think about a smart device. So you have an Alexa or an Apple HomePod or whatever they call it, or a Google, I don't know what they call theirs.
Google Home?
Everyone's got got their version.
Yeah.
Even if you leave Siri to listen for Hey Siri or whatever, right? All these things, they're listening all the time.
All the time.
Well, even if they're not recording that, which it's been shown that Alexa probably is, but say it's not. Say that's just temporary. It gets deleted almost immediately. Okay, fine. Okay. So in that time where it's not deleted, what is it used for?
Right.
It's used to train an AI. Well, and what do I mean by that? So maybe we should get more specific.
Yeah.
Machine learning has been around for a long time. a lot of software has been built on machine learning for at least a decade, if not 2 decades.
Mhm.
And what that means is it doesn't require a coder to write every line of code. You write a process, a recursive process that has a goal, and then you run a process that writes the code to get to that goal iteratively, so that the idea is to use some ideas from evolutionary biology of like adaptation and competition to get to a better final product.
Right.
So it's almost like the program evolves, right?
Yeah.
On a faster time scale.
Right.
So this has been going on a long time. Large language models are a little bit different because they're multidimensional. My understanding, and I could be way behind the times, but my understanding is they had to create 8 dimensions of executive function.
Okay.
So like if you think of like a normal processor's working on the ground level of just taking in data and then processing it and spitting it back out. So you just say like a video recording.
Yep.
It's just taking in photons and recording what came in.
Right.
Ground level.
Yep.
You have to go through 8 layers of abstraction before you get something that can understand and mimic, at least to some degree, what seems to be human understanding of. Like we can actually pick out what's in the image.
Yep. Okay.
Right. So we've gotten there.
Yeah. Yes.
But just so you understand what a neural network is that layered architecture of dimensions of abstraction.
Right.
How they train that is ridiculous. It's ugly brute force. And it actually requires tons of underpaid third world people labeling images for an image recognizer to then understand what those images are.
Okay.
So it's actually like, anyways, and that's beyond the fact that it's using more power than entire states
right.
to do this.
Right.
It's also using more manpower.
So to
it's
simplify
a brute
this
force method, but
well, and that's how are you saying that that's how it used to be, or it still is? So like if I post a picture of my family and we're trying to AI machine learn this thing, somebody's out there going,
well, it depends what your goal is.
Well, that's okay. Yep.
So like Siri has been able to recognize people in my photos for at least 8 years.
Yeah.
Like
I know it's actually kind of
I
enjoy
their names
it
on it.
I like being able to go to my photos.
But I never put their names
No.
on the image.
There's
it
some
just
that I've
pulls
had
out
to
images. Sometimes it's wrong.
Yeah, sometimes it's wrong. You have to correct
But
it.
like 90% of the time,
Yeah.
it'll pull an image and say who's in it, and it's correct.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I didn't give you that information.
Right. But
well,
it's
I did, but not on purpose.
right.
So here in the AI dilemma, why do I bring it up? Because they go, yeah, so you think when we think of AI, we're like, oh, like ChatGPT, now there's DeepSeek, whatever.
Right.
It's chatbots.
Right.
It can do some interesting things. It can write code for you. It can write poetry. It can, paint a picture, whatever.
Right.
Cool.
Cool.
So now
if it could just do my taxes so I could go make the art, that would be great.
It could do your taxes. They just won't be right.
Oh, trust me. I tried to do some finances through. I was like, here's a couple statements. I need you to help. And it couldn't even read a statement. And I'm like, no, it's numbers and it's got line items and it explains it. Why can't it machine learn this?
If you aren't worried about giving your sensitive information to the Chinese government.
Well, I just figure at this point, all of my soch, my blood type, my everything, everybody has it. I don't even care.
I'm not going to get into DeepSeek right now, but it is interesting because it can be run on your local computer.
Yeah.
Instead of on a server data center.
Oh.
Which is very different from ChatGPT, which cannot be run on your local computer. No. You have to have an internet connection because they're actually running it in a data center. Anyways.
That's interesting.
That's a big difference.
Yeah.
So throw that out the window. That doesn't matter for this part of the discussion.
Yeah. Okay.
So in 2023, they came up with a presentation, The AI Dilemma.
Yeah.
Why is it important? Well, it turns out, so they call it large language models or generative large language models. Yeah. You can use them fairly interchangeably, but some large language models are only for analysis, whereas if they're generative, they produce content.
Right.
Okay. What are they doing? They're translating from one language to another. That's basically what they do.
Yep.
In fact, I think GPT, the T stands for translator. I can't remember. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
Anyways, the why is that important? Well, you can turn anything into language,
Yes.
right? So the reason there's a digital image or digital video is actually there's just a bunch of zeros and ones, which are on and off switches,
Right.
logic gates, transistors turning on and off. And they're able to encode strings of zeros and ones. We usually use 64-bit, so that means there's 64 characters of zeros and ones. That gets translated into a number. Certain strings of numbers then become, say, certain colors and certain locations in the image. So we've been able to do that pretty well. I mean,
Right.
digital photography and film is pretty amazing what it
yeah.
can capture.
Yeah.
So, well, if it can capture that image, and then once it gets good at identifying what's in the image and giving you a transcript instantaneously because it can understand the language.
Yeah.
So there's other languages we might not want it to learn, but that they already have. So there's an LLM that can analyze Wi-Fi signals in a building and create a 3-dimensional map of every object in the building based on the reflections of the Wi-Fi off the objects.
Yes.
Including the people moving in live time.
Yes.
Kind of like in one of the Batman movies, actually.
Yes.
That's a real technology now. So,
which should terrify you.
There's another one. They trained an LLM to translate brainwaves into images or text. And it worked.
Oh.
And they don't know how it worked, but when they trained it long enough, they got it to be pretty accurate.
Whoa.
They tested it by having people watch a movie, and then it would either transcribe what they thought they were watching or create an image. And anyway, so you start to think about some of these things, and it's like, So you mentioned that I'm sensitive to people's energy.
Yeah.
I think everyone is innately.
Yeah.
But most people keep that in their subconscious.
Yes.
The only difference is I'm able to make some of that information consciously available.
Yeah.
That's really the only skill I would say. I think there's a reason, like, you can walk into a room and feel someone's emotion or have a sense of attraction or repulsion from someone. Everyone has it.
Right.
It's not unique to me. But
you're more aware of it.
But think about once AI knows about it.
Yeah.
So your brainwaves don't live just inside your head.
No.
There's a whole field around your head.
Right.
Of electromagnetic energy. And you could just bounce some little light carrier waves off that and get a lot of information.
Yeah.
Then you start thinking about, like, well, wait a minute. How far has it gone?
Yeah.
That's the stuff we know about. What about all the black budget programs?
Right.
Are they way ahead? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe the black budget has actually gone into some of these programs that they let us know a little bit about what they're doing. I don't know. But they used to say, I remember back in the 90s, people say good rule of thumb is basically the dark programs are about 20 to 30 years ahead of where the quote unquote white world is, the rest of us.
Right.
Well, if they're that far ahead, that'd be pretty scary.
It would be terrifying.
Because
because
I'll just put it this way. Nanorobotics have also come a long way.
Yes.
And basically machines that can self-assemble in the bloodstream are a real technology.
And may have been given to the masses already?
Maybe.
One way or another?
There are people who make that argument that say they can find it in the blood and that have treatments for it. So they usually use a lot of heavy metal chelation as treatment because these things tend to require magnetic metals.
Yep.
But if you're interested in that, go look on it on your own. I'm not going to give any advice on that. I'll just say there are plenty of scientific papers to show that nanorobotics are a real thing. They can deliver genetic payloads. These are peer-reviewed scientific papers. If you start combining these ideas, it really takes you down like a weird place where you're like, so what is the world we're living in? Do we even know what's been done?
No.
And especially, obviously combine that with genetic engineering, biotech. So it's like, okay, like, Klaus Schwab likes to call it the fourth industrial revolution, right? Where it's no longer, it revolutionizes us. It's not a product.
Right.
How far down that are we?
Well, I mean, so two of the examples that I think about a lot are, I remember when I was a kid and they were talking about cloning Dolly,
Mhm.
the sheep,
Mhm.
right? And then all of a sudden, cloning just like, when was
Went
the last time you've heard anything about cloning?
So gravity engines were the topic of discussion in the 50s.
Yeah.
And then it went dark.
Yeah.
Everyone stopped talking about them.
Right.
But then we see these quote unquote UAPs, what used to be called UFOs. And what do they look like? They look like they're gravity powered.
Yeah, they do.
They can stop on a dime, turn at a hard angle with high G's, and it doesn't seem to affect them.
Right. Well, and I thought it was interesting that Biden admin had nothing to say about it. And then Trump, what, a week ago? They ended up saying
they're all ours.
Yeah. What does that mean?
That means they've had gravity tech since probably the late 50s.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it just, especially with the deluge of things that have been happening, it was just kind of like a blip in the news radar.
Are you familiar with Dr. Stephen Greer?
Yes.
I could never explain everything he talks about, but the short and sweet of it is, yeah, there's a whole area of physics that's been hidden from the public.
Yeah.
Because it's considered too dangerous, but it's been developing in secret since about the 1950s. And the technology it's far beyond what people think. Like, I always laugh, right? When I see a rocket go up,
yeah.
I know, SpaceX is able to catch a rocket, which is kind of cool.
It's cool. It still looks fake as hell when I watch it, but it's super cool.
Well, rockets do look weird.
Yes.
Because it's plasma physics.
Right.
So anyways, but the doesn't it seem weird to you that we're still using brute force to lift a giant tube off the ground?
Yes. Very.
Like as if it's still the 1940s?
Right. Well, and for the longest time, we couldn't recreate the technology to be able to get
back to the moon.
Yeah.
We still haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the first Artemis launch was a total disaster.
Right.
So wait a minute. All of our technology has advanced in 70 years, except propulsion.
Right. It makes the math is not mathing.
Obviously not true.
No.
But the question is why is it so dangerous? Well, because when you manipulate gravity, you manipulate time.
Yeah. So
there's actually an explanation for gravity that the reason we don't detect it as a force. So the 4 fundamental forces, right? Electromagnetism, gravity, and then the strong and weak nuclear forces.
Correct.
Keep atoms from
just randomly splitting. Yeah. Thank you.
And also not collapsing.
Yeah.
So what's the deal with gravity though? It's the only one that's not quantized or not part of quantum physics.
Which, back to your early point of naturalists versus, what was the other term you used?
Well, the other term would just be, so there's a whole philosophy called integral.
Integral, yeah.
Which I'm sort of referencing with integral naturalism.
Yeah.
I align with it in some ways.
Right.
I think it's gotten a little... Anyways, Ken Wilber made it a little too complicated for me.
Yeah.
When I say integral, I mean it more in the just Taoist sense of understanding that everything fits together.
Right. Well, yeah. But to your point, that's how does that even happen? So
there's a great PBS production called Space Time where there's just like a PhD in physics who just hosts a channel and he tells you like about recent discoveries and the history of certain concepts and explains, and they have pretty good infographics. I think it's only on YouTube. Anyways, interesting show. One time they covered an idea. It's funny. Sometimes I have ideas and then he'll cover the topic and I love it because I'm like, oh, you actually
the synchronicities of,
Anyways.
So does he have one on gravity?
Yeah. So there's tons of them on gravity.
Okay.
There was one episode he did where they talked about what if gravity was actually not a force, but the effect of the slowing of time. So we normally think about it as higher gravity slows time.
Yeah.
But it could be the opposite.
Yeah.
The reason you fall toward a massive object is because time is slower closer to it. So it creates a well So if you think about it this way,
Oh,
if
you
you're
just
flying by a
fucked
star
with my head so bad, David.
and the time is going slower near the star, it creates drag in the
Yeah.
direction of the star, so it curves your path toward it.
Yeah.
That's what gravity does.
Yeah,
But
it
that's
is.
also what time dilation does.
Yes.
So the question is like, maybe it's not a force. It's just dilating time.
Oh, gosh.
And so this is why gravity tech is dangerous,
Yeah.
because you're talking about control over time.
Right.
So this is why,
Oh,
like,
man.
inside the craft, you're moving at a different time frame than outside, which is why it looks like it's moving in zigzags and instantly
Right.
turning.
And
Because inside, they're totally comfortable as if nothing's happening.
oh, man. I'm getting shivers.
Yeah.
That's well, and then I mean, if the danger there is you're manipulating time.
Right. So now you're talking about a level of power that even, I'm sure you've heard of directed energy weapons.
Yeah.
Or moderate. That's the new name for lasers.
Right.
If anyone doesn't know.
Right.
They have, look them up. DEW, directed energy weapons. There's tons of them. There's ones that fly on drones. There's one, you can mount them on a satellite.
And you can put them on a warship.
Yeah, I mean, there's new images.
Tanks.
I saw one being fired off of a ship. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they can do a lot of damage. Now they take a lot of power.
Right.
They're not easy to power. But you can even buy research grade lasers that can cut through stuff.
Yeah, I love those videos.
Yeah.
And isn't it interesting what it can and can't do with things colored blue?
Again, it always depends on the frequency you're using and whether it resonates with what it comes in contact with.
Yeah.
But yes, it is funny that blue things seem to survive in certain disasters.
Yeah. It's interesting. Well, so then, okay, so
I think you could make an argument that the reason gravity tech is still top secret is because they have a legitimate fear of what would happen.
Yeah.
If it proliferated.
Well, so you have things like that technology. You have CERN, which what the hell? And then you have people that very clearly have different memories because of something like the Mandela effect.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to Einstein and the ability to time travel. You can't. So
general relativity is an explanation of gravity.
Right.
But how does it describe gravity?
As a force.
As a force that dilates space-time.
Yes, which is what, as soon as you inverse that, I'm like, okay, that's how you throw that out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it doesn't mean general relativity is wrong. It just means we've been using the words in the wrong direction.
Yes.
To describe it.
Yeah.
But it also tells you why it doesn't comport well with quantum physics, because quantum physics is describing forces that can be quantized as wavelengths, where that's not really what gravity is, unless you consider wavelengths on the scale of solar systems.
Right.
And then you can say, yeah, well, they have been able to detect gravity waves now.
Oh.
But it takes to create a wave of high enough frequency that we can even detect it on our scale. It's got to be
pretty damn big.
I think it's it was two massive stars collapsing into each other.
Cool.
Spiraling super fast around each other. Their center of gravity until they collided. That's what it takes to create a gravity wave we can detect.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
There's so many implications in everything that you just said that I'm like, it's going to take me a minute to digest and integrate and take that all in.
So here, I'll take us on a left turn.
Yeah, please.
I don't know that much about Mormonism.
But
what I do know is they have stories, I believe, about Jesus visiting North America.
Yes.
Which I used to think was just obviously crazy.
Yeah.
And then I realized, no, the more I've learned about ancient history, the more that makes perfect sense. Again, the Egyptian artifacts.
Right.
Where did the Bible, I think, talks about Jesus as a young child. Yep. And then Jesus as a young man.
Right.
His adolescence is completely missing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of time there for him to have visited some other places.
Yeah.
There's
there's an argument that he went east.
Yeah, there was a German anthropologist who claimed he found evidence that Jesus had visited temples in Egypt and India.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised.
I wouldn't either.
And maybe he also visited North America.
Yeah. Well, and the argument for North American Mormonism is it was post-resurrection. He has the line, other sheep I have that I must visit. And so post-resurrection.
So do you know, there's a whole documentary by the BBC on his post-resurrection life.
Okay.
And they show, I want to say it's in Kashmir, India, somewhere in the mountains. They have a temple with a statue of the Swami from Nazareth who has the scars from crucifixion.
Oh, that's cool.
So supposedly after resurrection, he left and went somewhere he had been earlier in life.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah.
And maybe he traveled the world.
Yeah.
Carrying on the message.
Yeah.
He just didn't return to Judea. Crucify me once.
Yeah. Yeah. What did we make the point? Marilyn Manson? Yeah, we'd still do that today.
So,
oh man.
Yeah. So, again, I hold everything with a grain of salt. I don't believe that's necessarily the truth of what happened.
Yeah.
But I think it's an interesting story because, well, when we can get into the Shroud of Turin, I don't know if you heard recently the Shroud of Turin was kind of verified.
Yeah. Which is
bizarre.
Yeah. Well, because they had been trying to
debunked.
carbon date pieces that had been repaired and
right. No,
right.
So they did carbon date it.
Yeah.
They called it a forgery
Yep.
because the carbon dating came back the Middle Ages.
Right.
Like 1400, somewhere
Right.
there. That was done, I think, in the 80s, maybe early 90s. They did a couple. Oh, it turns out there's a technique from the Middle Ages of weaving new fibers into old ones so it's indistinguishable.
Oh, that piece I had not heard about all this.
Yeah, so they were repairing it because it was considered a holy relic. They didn't want it to deteriorate.
Yeah.
So the edge pieces that they had tested were actually newer.
Right.
So they did some kind of radio forget what they called it, but it was basically they were scanning for certain radiation signatures that decayed at a certain rate. It wasn't carbon, but the new scan basically determined that the majority of it was
dates back to the
200
time of
BC and 200
yeah,
AD.
It's so cool.
Which puts it right in the perfect window.
Right.
And you go like,
well, and then when you
serious?
see what would have had to have left the imprint,
it's a lot of it's human blood.
Right.
And they've proven that it's not paint, it's human blood.
Right. So it's pretty cool.
It's a little bit bizarre. It definitely is one of those things that makes you go like, whoa, did this really happen the way they said it did?
Right.
You know, like they killed him and he came back to life.
Right.
Well,
and then what are the implications there? Mm-hmm. Because the first implication I think anybody would go to is, okay, then Christianity is true. Okay. I mean, what it does tell you is that
if you mean Christianity by following the teachings of Jesus,
yes,
then yes.
Yeah, and that's not what I meant.
That's true.
Yeah, but yes, what you just said, yes. But how many people would use it to justify their version of Christianity?
This is why we have so many churches.
Right.
And what I've always been interested in is withholding judgment and going like, well, what does this group say? What does that group say?
Right.
What piece of it do they know that I don't?
Right.
And I can always say, I think they got something wrong.
Right.
But maybe I'll come back to it later and go, maybe that thing I thought was wrong wasn't as wrong as I originally thought.
Right. Well, and exposure is the best cure, right? Mm-hmm. Like, give me more. I want more information. I want to study more, even if it's this thread of this thread. There's something else there that's unique. Why is it unique? Why do people think that way? Is there any validity to it? I want to eat as much of that thing as I can, eat the meat, spit out the bones. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, give me the whole bloody thing and let me try and piece it together so I can keep the good and get rid of the bad. Yeah. And that's why I don't understand closed-mindedness, right? The being raised one way and then thinking, that was one of my big arguments against Mormonism is there's 16, now I think it's technically 17 million of you on this planet. And you guys think you're the only ones that have it right. And you think you're 100% right. But we're the only true church. We're the only ones that have all the truth. Really? 17 million people out of 8 billion? You guys got it? And it just because
it's the same thing that they claim in Scientology.
Right. Well, and that's and pick
Another American religion.
Pick a region. I mean, you could go back to Catholicism. Okay, so you guys at the Vatican are the only ones that have this right, and
So-
you could like a papal succession and be like, some of you popes were crazy and terrible, horrible people,
Oh yeah.
and yet you kept. So the fruit of that tree is still good though. Okay,
No,
all right.
that's why you just hit on exactly why I can never really fall back into alignment with the church,
Right.
because I know too much about the corruption.
Yeah.
And they went through their pedophile scandals. But the thing that really bothered me, because look, every group of people, every institution's going to have a few bad apples. Okay, that's fine.
Yep.
But what wasn't fine about it, they didn't hold them to justice. They hid them.
Yep.
They moved them around and let them continue to hurt children.
Yep.
And when you knowingly aid and abet that kind of behavior,
Especially because it had to
That's
reach the
dark.
highest levels to make those
and
decisions.
it did.
Right.
And then when you start learning about like some of the things that may or may not happen at seminaries, you start to go like, what's really going on here?
Right.
What? And I'll put it to you this way. I didn't really used to believe in evil.
Oh.
I
Okay.
used to think, I used to believe there's such thing as predation or
Yeah.
parasitism.
Okay.
But that really evil was just the perspective. Like when you
yeah.
say you had a parasite in your gut, to you the parasite's evil, but the parasite's just
Parasite.
trying to survive,
It's just
right?
yeah, absolutely. Yep. So it's all about perspective. That was
That's how I initially thought
Yeah.
of it.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
don't believe that anymore.
Oh.
I do think there is true evil in the world.
Really?
It's the only way I can explain some of the things I've come to understand. Because there is such a thing as corruption,
Yeah.
right? Maybe I'll bring it back to like health.
Okay. Perfect. Yep.
This is a simpler way to understand it than looking at the whole world, right? Which I don't understand completely. and no one
It's a
does.
it's a complex
So-
system built on complex systems. It
When you
gets a
look at
little-
your own life,
Yeah.
if you make an attempt to eat healthier, have healthier habits, exercise more,
get more sleep.
get more sleep, have more gratitude, drink more water, improve the quality of each of those things too. So the quality of your food, the quality of your water, quality of your air, the quality of your time with family, the quality of your spiritual pursuits. Sincerity is a big part of it.
Yeah.
You act with sincerity and love and forgiveness in your life as much, it's a practice. None of us are perfect, right? But
Right.
we practice it to try to get better at it. You will heal, right? And what is healing? It means to become whole,
Yeah.
right? Your body reintegrates. Like when you have a wound, you have an invasion of an outside force. And if that, ideally you don't let it get infected, but even if it does, your body eventually, if you survive, push it out and
Yep.
you become whole again.
Yeah.
You may have a scar, but you reintegrate. Something that has caused disintegration can then be
Reintegrate.
reintegrated.
Yeah.
This is true on every level, whether that's the physical body, So I will say maybe I have a certain thought on what the layers of the body are.
Oh yeah.
So there's the what we normally call material physicality, right? Like
Yeah.
the stuff that's made of atoms.
Right.
Now, if we really want to split hairs, atoms are empty space. It's really just wave energy, but
Right. Yeah.
let's not get that
We'll-
worried about it.
Right. Yeah. We'll keep it simple.
Yeah. So you have the atoms, those make molecules. The molecules make larger structures. We have cells, we have genetic material, proteins, So we have all these structures that are
Right.
physical. But then you have to ask yourself, well, what's the difference between a living and a dead body? It's energy.
Yeah.
Right? One has energy coursing through it, and the
Yep.
other doesn't.
Yep.
So, well, what does that mean? Well, some people will say, well, that's just metabolism. And we've been able to discover like the molecular machinery that allows for metabolism to drive forward.
Yeah.
On some level, that's true.
Yeah.
But you have to think about what that actually means. What the mitochondria does is it harvests electrons.
Okay. Yep.
And it puts those electrons in high energy phosphate bonds,
Mm-hmm.
which are then transferred around the cell to accomplish different tasks.
Right.
Basically, ATP, adenosine triphosphate, all three of those phosphates can be used. So they get less and less energetic, I believe, as you use more of them.
Okay.
But they can be used to drive other processes forward. Anyways, all I'm saying is, if you're a materialist, that's where your explanation ends.
Right.
But what are electrons? Well, in the nervous system, so I should say that's electron transport. The nervous system actually uses positive ions. The nervous system uses sodium ions.
Okay.
Sodium channel in to transfer the sodium ions. And the muscles actually use calcium ions.
Yep. Okay.
But anytime you have a charge and it moves, that's an electrical current.
Right.
You can have positive charges or negative charges.
Yep.
Doesn't matter.
Right.
So in fact, the mitochondria is driven by hydrogen protons, which are actually one definition of acid. So it's kind of interesting. It's a very acidic environment, which is why it creates a lot of oxidative stress.
Yeah.
Because it is the process of oxidation that actually gives us life.
And also kills us.
Right.
Yeah.
So
we're
on one
slowly
level, you can
oxidizing.
say-
We're fire breathers.
yeah. So
Yeah.
the if you look at the chemical reaction of fire and what the mitochondria does, it's approximately the same. It's just the mitochondria controls the reaction to
Yeah.
harvest all of the energy,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Or as much of the energy as possible.
Right. And we have a little bit more efficient waste.
But the waste heat is also important, because if we didn't have waste heat in that
Yeah.
process, we'd freeze to death.
Right.
So-
It is the way that our bodies work is miraculous.
Yes. So that's the next question.
Yes.
What organizes?
Right. Right.
And so from a materialist worldview, they like to say nothing organizes,
Right.
just random chance.
Yep. Damned if we get lucky.
Well, that's not true.
Okay.
The problem is there's no such thing as random.
No, the universe does not. What in the universe, once you boil it down, is random.
There's no step that's random, right? Every step is a consequence of a previous step.
Yes.
Right. So this is where people talk about hyperdeterminism. Like, we actually don't have a choice. That gets into a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
But,
Free will versus, yeah.
but regardless, if physics processes are cause and effect based, you can't argue that there's a randomness. There's just a complexity beyond your understanding.
Yes.
Which is different.
Yeah.
So I'll give you a framework I use for it is, so like we have that energy coursing through us. But the reason it's actually concordant, doing things we want it to do in harmony rather than just destructive,
Right.
and explosive,
Yeah.
is because of what normally is called quantum entanglement, which I call quantum coherence.
I like that. I like that reframing.
So what keeps your cells working together is a field of coherence.
Yeah.
Now, coherence is not an energy. It's a system of order.
Yep.
And I believe that fundamentally that's what consciousness does to matter. It orders it.
It orders it.
And it's somewhat passive, because you can't just like think and make something happen.
Right. Which would be lovely.
Yeah. Well, in another rabbit hole, but we can't just imagine things into existence
Right.
necessarily. Now,
Yeah.
we can have something in our imagination and later on bring it into
manifest it.
existence.
Yeah.
But we can even make it. We
Yeah.
can build it.
Yeah.
Most of this comes from imagining.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
But we can't just imagine that
I can't just poof a
I
Mac
have another
in front of
leg,
me.
or, if I have an injury, that it just didn't happen.
Right.
I don't get to, at least not yet.
At least not yet.
We'll see where nanorobots go.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh.
But but it keeps things organized. There's also other layers, right? So, like for instance, I practice acupuncture.
Yeah.
A lot of times people go, well, what are the acupuncture channels? Or most people call them meridians. Channel's a better translation, but because it's literally the character that's used is like a channel for funneling water.
Yeah.
Well, most people are like, well, it's chi, it's vital energy. I don't like that explanation.
Okay.
Because
So-
for energy to flow through the body, there's a structure.
Right.
Your nervous system is a very electrical system.
Yeah.
But it's a structure.
Yeah.
So there has actually been groups who have found tiny vessels running the channel pathways.
Oh.
They're very hard to find because they're very thin and they're translucent and they're very hard to stain. But I think in the late 90s, there was a group there was actually a guy who claimed he did it in the 50s or 60s in North Korea, but no one could reproduce his work, so they
Right.
thought he was lying.
But then they did, and then-
Bonghan, they called him the Bonghan duct, which is a super awkward name. But this group in the late 90s figured it out, got a new staining method, and claimed what they called the Primo Vascular system.
Primo Vascular
Another
system.
awkward name.
Yeah.
So basically, they discovered the channels actually do have a physical vessel that runs the
That's
pathway.
fascinating. And
Strange thing is, it's filled with a liquid that is full of genetic material.
that's just what I was going to ask.
they
What's
don't know
traveling the
why.
channel? Yeah.
So here's some weird facts about the channels. If you find them on the skin with a conductance meter, they're
Mhm.
more conductive than the rest of the skin.
Okay.
The main acupoints along the channel are more conductive than the rest of the channel.
Okay.
So we already know there's something electrical going on.
Yeah. That you
else?
can actually measure.
It has been, yes.
Yeah.
What else is weird is they've detected that if you shoot laser light into the channels, especially red laser light, you can detect it coming out of other parts of the same channel,
Oh.
especially the other points.
Yeah.
So this gets into like, what even is DNA?
Yeah.
So if you think about it, it's a helical crystal.
Yep.
You can call it a polymer. It has a ribose sugar backbone.
Okay.
That's what deoxyribonucleic acid.
Yep.
So there's a ribose sugar and phosphate connecting in a long polymer chain along the backbones. And then it has these nucleic acids which match up to each other along the middle like a zipper. It
Yep.
can be unzipped, copied, and rezipped. And also be edited.
Yes, it can.
The interesting thing about it is we have repair mechanisms that repair mutations.
Right.
How do you do that? I've always thought that's the strangest thing I've ever heard, because how do you know what to change?
Right.
Once it's changed, how do you know what's wrong and what's right?
Right. It's a good question.
My argument, and this is totally a hypothesis, is that so the microtubules in the cell made of tubulin, so there's also actin fibers, which are different, but tubulin is a hollow tube, vacuum inside,
Oh.
nothing's inside of it.
Okay.
Most of them run from the nucleus to the cell membrane.
Okay.
It's been discovered that it's the perfect fiber optic.
Uh-huh.
And they just happen to run from the nucleus, where you have the genome of DNA,
Uh-huh.
to the cell membrane on the outside,
Yeah.
where the next cell membrane is.
Yeah.
So we may be talking about a network of fiber optics interacting with genomes. And not only that, but if you look into orchestrated organic reduction, the tubulin actually has subunits that are aromatic that can go into quantum superposition, and those can go into quantum coherence with one another. And you can actually have quantum computing taking place in the tube itself while it's interacting with light that's flowing through. And this gets me back to like, okay, so what even is DNA? They say 98% of our genome is junk.
Yep.
Only 2% codes for protein.
Right.
Well, maybe the other 98% is all about light.
Yeah. It would seem to be.
So that gives you a very different view of then why can one cell, even though it's mutated, know what the correct non-mutated code would have been, because it can get information from another cell that's not mutated.
Yep.
So this is how I actually think things are organized. Now, and I think I'm just scratching the surface. We don't we still don't know how consciousness comes into the equation.
Well, yeah, there's a reason why my brain keeps coming back to that definition of energy as information that vibrates.
Mm-hmm.
And and what is light?
Well, and here's a weird one. DNA, when it absorbs a photon,
Yeah.
it uncoils slightly
Okay.
to store that energy. And then when it recoils, it re-emits a photon.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
So it can just change conformation in order to interact with light.
Hmm.
And once it's absorbed and re-emitted a photon, it's now quantum entangled with that photon.
Yes.
So this is like, quantum biology is weirder than we think, because they used to say the cells are too warm and noisy for quantum effects to happen. It's been proven untrue.
That was their argument against it, was that it was too warm and...
Well, so in the laboratory, it's only easy to observe quantum effects at near absolute zero.
Oh, okay. All right.
Because you're isolating
Okay.
it. You're slowing everything down to almost hardly moving at all.
Yeah.
Turns out biology, you could either call it exploits quantum phenomena, or you could say it's designed with quantum phenomena,
Yeah.
or evolved within a quantum universe, however you want to think of that. I personally think of like, well, if God is eternal, maybe time is the way that he creates things, and all evolution means is change over time.
Yeah.
But I'm also a heretic.
Well,
This is how I think.
and maybe this is a good point to ask what you think it's all about. Like, why are we here? Why does any of that matter? Why? What the hell are we doing?
Short and sweet of it,
Yeah.
we're here to suffer.
We're here to suffer.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Tell me more.
So this is one of the noble truths of Buddha.
Yeah.
Life is suffering. And the most powerful image of Jesus is with the crown of thorns
Yeah.
and the sad look on his face as he carries his cross to crucifixion.
Yeah.
Is that's the point of incarnation.
Why? I'm gonna be the annoying 2-year-old. What?
Because if you
Why?
can suffer and still forgive, it deepens your heart and your soul. If you instead react by forcing others to suffer, you don't learn a lesson.
Yeah.
You don't level up. You don't deepen your soul. But if you can suffer and still forgive, then you do.
So that's a really beautiful answer for why we're incarnated here now.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Well, and we kind of touched on it earlier. You were talking about 1 becomes 2 becomes 3. And the other thing that I have a really hard time with in mainstream religion is just that basic idea of heaven and hell. Because I think, okay, so after I get this one life, if I get it right, I get it wrong, I'm either getting eternal paradise, I'm either getting eternal torment. And
I think there's truth to that story, and there's truth to the reincarnation story.
Yeah. Okay. So let me get this thought out, and then we'll circle. We'll explore those things. And it kind of comes back to that. It's just God playing hide and go seek with himself. Like, why does God allow suffering? Why does God allow bad things to happen in this world? Why can't it all just be love and forgiveness? You don't learn anything that way. Mm-hmm. And with the whole, you get heaven for eternity. I'm going to get bored after about 10 years.
Oh, that's why you might want to reincarnate.
Well, okay. So, and that's, there it is. Okay. So hit me with all of that.
I still live in the mystery. I'm not going to say I know
right.
what the other side is.
Yeah.
I don't.
Right.
But I can say there's a lot of different depictions of it that are interesting.
Yeah.
You know, Dante's got 9 circles of hell?
Yeah.
Not just one big fiery pit.
No.
Not to say that he was right or wrong, but and then there's, 7 heavens or something? I don't know. I mean, and I go, if you understand them as layers of reality, I could say I probably agree. Like the group, there's a group of remote viewers, I think out of the Monroe Institute. They have a whole map of all these places you can go in remote viewing sessions, and where you can help the souls of the dead cross over, and all these different places where souls end up.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think, again, anytime you try to put too much language to it, you run the risk of being partially wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, some children have memories of past lives.
Right.
Usually up until about age 5 or 6. And sometimes those memories can be verified. I mean, there was a famous story of, I think they found a crashed World War II plane because of the child's past life memory.
It's kind of wild.
I hold the door open. I think, yeah, like you just said. So if you went to heaven and it was total paradise and there was no suffering, how long before you'd want to come back and suffer some more?
Right. Does that make us all masochists? Like, what is that?
Well, no, you want to learn.
Yeah.
It gets boring. Well, like if your every need is met 24 hours a day, what are you struggling against and what are you struggling for?
Right.
Again, this is why I do believe there's real evil. Although I think I like to phrase it this way: even the demons work for God in the end.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like there is real evil, but ultimately it's here because we need it to be here.
That might be the most heretical thing you've said so far, by the way. I totally agree with it.
And it's for each of us to test who we really are.
Yeah.
And to try to figure out if we can be better.
Yeah.
And what it even means to be better.
Right.
Because that's something you don't come in knowing.
No.
You know, that's what it takes a lifetime to even try to fathom.
Well, and I'm going to try and regurgitate this. Rachel and I were talking about, do you just keep reincarnating until you've learned everything? I'm like, am I going to get kicked out if I go to the God meeting, at the end of all these incarnations? And it's like, okay, pop quiz. What was so special about the 1932 stamp with Abraham Lincoln on it? Or right, like something about a stamp collection or something, right? Like, so it's not it, which might actually be the definition of suffering. If that's your thing, is stamp collecting, maybe that truly is suffering.
You die and you wake up in a massive bureaucracy where you're just being processed like everyone else.
Or just, oh gosh.
Sir, you didn't get the right stamp, so now you have to go back to this time period.
It'd be so bad.
Sir, your papers weren't signed correctly.
You need to go back. Oh gosh. Oh man. But I do think that our fractal of God, our consciousness, our soul, might have, maybe you really need to learn forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a difference. There's so many different sides of forgiveness, different things to forgive. And right? I mean, so your spouse cheats on you. That's one form of hurt and forgiveness that you have to learn.
And forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean that you take a specific action afterward. Like, it doesn't mean that you stay with the person or that you leave them.
Correct.
What?
But it's the letting go of
the resentment that's caused by the pain.
Yeah. You were betrayed by your right-hand man as the king.
Mm-hmm.
A young first-time driver rear ends you. Those are all different things that you're going to take some kind of resentment towards.
Mm-hmm.
You could be a king, you could be a pauper, you could be a commoner, you could be male, female, but it's all like, how many different ways do you have to go through the act of forgiveness before that is who you are?
Yeah.
And so that's one of my ideas behind reincarnation is you probably don't need to figure everything out, because you either innately already have, but there might be something, a specific sort of lesson that you have to experience in different angles from.
The older I get, I'll say there's two things. One, I think meaning can keep people alive, and the lack of meaning can kill someone.
For sure. I mean, look at the number of people that retire and their whole meaning in life was their work, and then they're dead.
And maybe I can also use the word purpose.
Yeah, purpose is a really good word.
But also, I've come to really believe that we come in with, maybe it's not set in stone, but there's some kind of map of our lifetime. You can call it destiny or a plan or whatever. But
yeah, you had alluded to free will versus.
And I think we do have free will.
Yeah.
But I think there are certain turning points that there's some kind of contract that our soul gets into upon incarnation.
Yeah.
There's just, you can call it synchronicity maybe, but you know, it's hard to even explain, but you just see when you meet more people and learn people's stories, like, you know, my job, I listen to people's stories, really.
Yeah.
You know, I try to help them heal.
Yeah.
But a lot of that healing process is just listening to their story and letting them feel heard.
Right.
And then I try to do my best to, one, do what I can directly, but then also tell them about things that I think will help them heal. But I really think the more stories I hear, the more I think, like, you know, I guess one thing is the only way to turn suffering into a gem of wisdom, right, is to accept that you're learning a lesson from it.
Yeah.
Whether you want to believe that that was predestined or not. But again, I don't think the universe is perfectly deterministic, but say if it were, then it would be totally predestined anyway.
Right.
But I do think there are certain, I like to think of it this way. I think of time as a landscape.
Okay.
So there is different directions you can turn through time.
Right.
But there are high gravity objects.
Yes.
That suck you toward them.
Yeah. So
there are certain things that are much more likely to happen than other things.
Right.
But
yeah, you're determined whether you're going to Coach Anita's or the 315 tomorrow night. Probably not a big gravity well situation.
Or maybe it is.
Right. But in general,
it's not a big consequence necessarily.
Right.
Although it could be.
Right.
Maybe something bad happens at one of them and not the other.
Trump turning his head, not turning his head. We're on a different timeline.
Yep. So sometimes what seems inconsequential actually has huge ramifications.
Of course.
But again, I still think there's, you know, some people wouldn't talk about a gut feeling or intuition.
Yeah.
There's some part of us that can feel our way through time.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to understand it visually because it's everything all at once. And it's every possibility.
Right.
Moving in every direction. So our minds can't process information like that. But in a way we almost have a tactile sense is how I like to think of it. That's what when people say it's a gut feeling.
Yeah. Spidey
like
sense.
You know when you're like in the wrong situation.
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't know why I know, but this is the wrong situation.
Yeah.
I gotta go. Should listen to those.
Yes.
Anytime I've not listened to it, yeah, there's consequences.
Yeah.
So
I had one the other night that it was inconsequential. Jeez, get that word out. But it was funny because I looked at whatever the thing was and I thought I should do something about this. Like it was screwing the lid on the milk jug or something ridiculous, right? Like, yep, I got this. I know I should do something about it. It doesn't matter. And then sure enough, the next person that went and grabbed the milk jug spilt it all over the place. And like, those are, again, inconsequential, but it is kind of cool to have the...
But then you spend an hour cleaning up the kitchen that you didn't want to spend.
Right. And I wonder how often those sorts of things, and I've trained myself to pay more and more attention to those moments. Mm-hmm. And the first time that I remember it being real, like it is the example that sticks out in my head, is I was at Fred Meyer's and like at 9:00 at night, right, picking up some milk, and I wandered into the clothing section and I was standing by the socks. And again, like, I'm picking up milk. Why am I wandering through? Of all the things that I could have chosen to do, why am I wandering over here? standing by the socks, and I used to steal my grandpa's socks. And my grandpa's my person, best friend. And like, I should call my grandpa. And that, right, that gut feeling, that tactile, that all that stuff was call your grandpa. The heart center was telling me, call my grandpa. My brain, my intellect center was saying, it's 9 o'clock. He's asleep. You can call him tomorrow. It was all the justifications. It was all the don't listen to your gut. Don't listen to your heart. And so I walked away. And my heart was like, no, you need to call him right now. It doesn't make any sense, but I'm telling you, you have to call him right now. So I called him. He didn't pick up, but I left a message, and I even said, I don't know why I'm calling you. I just feel like I need to. And really, I just feel like I need to express how much I love you. He called me back a couple minutes later and said, yeah, I was falling asleep, but I saw you call, and I just wanted to talk to you and see how you're doing. And so I'm like, I'm getting all emotional. I don't know why I needed to call you. I just needed to tell you that I loved you and that you've been the best. And I appreciate you so much. And that was my last phone call with him before he died.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't listened, and so that ever since then I've gone, I don't care how small, how weird it is. Should I go to the coaching videos or the 315? What am I? If I can feel that tactile sense, if I can feel my heart say, this is the choice that you need to make, this is a thing you need to pay attention to, I pay attention to it.
Yeah. It's hard to really let yourself listen on that level sometimes.
Yeah.
But it is important. Yeah. I mean, it really is. There is something mysterious and divine about the heart.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you made that distinction early on between our intellect and our heart, because I think it's a really good point.
And I mean, I will say there's also the crown and the halo, and you can connect to the cosmic divine through the top of the head, but that's also different than the mind that feels more trapped in the head.
Right.
Because I think, there's even the phrase a lot of people use, right? It's all in your head.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, if that's true, so is everything.
Right. Well, and then, gosh, there's so many different things there, right? Is it our pineal gland produces DMT? Yeah. And then what is, okay, so we're actually high all the time. Are we making all this shit up? Maybe.
So maybe I'll finish it where I started. Is Dean Radin has some extremely interesting studies on how conscious intention can affect material outcomes and affect other people.
Yeah.
But there's also a group, I think it's called the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, PAIR Lab.
Oh, cool.
Last I checked, their website was still up, but I don't know. Regardless, they actually went through the process of engineering basically quote unquote random number generators.
Okay.
So they created multiple types. Some were physical, where like an object would fall through and bounce off things and pathway was random. And they did a lot of work to engineer them so that there was no greater likelihood for any particular outcome.
Okay.
So probabilistically seemed random.
Yeah.
And they had also electronic ones, and then they would put them under like shielding so they couldn't be electrically affected by anything. Yeah. And then they did some weird things. They had some people choose a particular outcome and focus on trying to get it to happen just intentionally with their mind. Most people could get a slight increase. Some people could get a large increase in that outcome. And then a small group of people, that outcome would become less likely.
Oh,
but
that's
it always
wild.
changed the outcome that they were focused on. But here's a weird one.
That's blowing my mind.
It even worked if you watched it on video later.
No way.
Yeah. It didn't matter if it was actually happening in front of you or not.
That is crazy. Well, I mean, talk about quantum anything.
Yeah. So the level of weirdness that is consciousness itself, again, it's like, this is why in quote unquote science. I don't know. I guess neurobiology. I'm not exactly sure what field would actually, but there is the idea of the hard problem of consciousness.
Yeah. Well, it's
a hard problem because everything else is inside of it.
Right. Well, and we have a problem with measuring gravity. Well, not measure, but yeah,
figuring out how it's transmitted.
Right. But yeah, good luck with consciousness.
Mm-hmm. It's the only thing that's bigger than gravity.
Right.
Actually, Alan Watts has a really great take on it. He says, it's like trying to figure out what space is made of.
Right.
It's like, well, it's the emptiness in which everything else exists.
Yeah. Oh man. Well,
and so
as above, so below.
Yeah. So that's the weird thing is like even all the ideas we have about what even is a body exist within consciousness.
Yeah.
All the science we've ever done only exists within consciousness. All the experiences we've ever had.
Yeah.
All the evidence that could prove one thing or another only exists in consciousness. In the field of consciousness. So you go like, well, that.
Well, my favorite example of that is if I put a strawberry in front of both of us, we both know it's a strawberry.
Mm-hmm.
My reality, your reality, my consciousness, your consciousness. We can discuss it. Yes, that's a strawberry. What color is it? It's red. Mm-hmm. What color are the leaves? Green. What you're seeing is different than what I'm seeing. Right? What I see is red and what you see is red. We both agree it's red, but I have no fucking idea if what you're seeing is the same as what I'm seeing. We agree that that we will define it the same. But my experience of it could be 100% the same as you, or more likely is different. What does that shade of red look like? How do you experience it?
Yeah.
And go down the list.
All we can say is we can quantify the frequency of red light.
Yeah.
But we don't know how another person would experience that.
Right.
And then, so here's a weird one. Are you familiar with Ingo Swann?
It sounds vaguely familiar.
He was the guy who started the, basically the Psychic Soldier program.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I think he was part of the CIA, but maybe it was just Department of Defense. I don't know.
And that was what, the 60s, 70s?
Yeah, that sounds right. Definitely during the Cold War.
See the Men Who Talk with Goats or whatever the movie was? Yeah.
That's the movie that sort of makes fun of
the whole thing. Yeah.
But he wrote a lot of books, and I think one was called Psychic Literacy.
Okay.
And it starts out talking about how the Soviets had actually been doing all this research on psychic phenomena.
Yeah.
Because their culture was much more agnostic about the nature of reality. So they didn't have a reason to reject it.
Oh, yeah.
So they were researching, and they wanted, to one up the Americans, of course. So
of course.
Anything that could be weaponized should be, right?
Of course.
So they did some studies, and they found that most people could feel being stared at.
Yeah, which is that one's. I hate staring at people because I know as soon as I look at them, I'm like, they're going to turn around. They're going to feel me looking at them.
So
I know what's going to happen.
If they put a metal screen between the two people, they usually couldn't feel it.
Oh.
Even though they could still be seen.
Yeah. Oh.
So that means there's something being projected out when you look at something.
Oh, yes,
so
it
this
does.
gets back to the strawberry. It's like, what are you doing to
the
strawberry to get to know it?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, the eyes are the gateway to the soul. And
That's
so
what we tend to say.
You're exposing both your soul and the strawberry to whatever that is.
There's a problem in mathematics about defining the number 1.
Okay.
Because
I always thought it was 0 that they had trouble actually defining.
Well, 0 came later.
Right.
But actually, modern mathematicians have gone back to looking at the number 1. Like, how do you quantify what is 1?
Okay.
And there is no definition.
How so?
So my argument is because it's a choice. It's not defined. So this is why you can say the whole universe is 1.
Right.
Or you can say a single subatomic particle is one.
Right. Yeah.
You have to choose the unit.
Oh, yeah. Damn.
So this is why like mathematics is based on there has to be something that is one so that there can be all the other numbers because they're multiples of one.
Yeah.
But what is one?
What is one? Oh, no. David, I'm going to have to do either a lot of drinking, a lot of meditating, a lot of something after this. Probably lead with drinking.
No, but I really have come to the conclusion that one is a choice.
Yeah.
It's whatever you decide.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you, again, going back to the having cigars with August and John, I've always really, and Alan Watts basically says the same thing, that first spark of consciousness, that first realization of existence, the first utterance is, I am. Right? I am alive. I am me. I am black. I am white. I am whatever. Right? Which also leads to then you have to have the opposite to define the one thing, the I amness.
Right. Like Adam.
Like Adam.
The first human, or like Om or Omni.
Yeah.
Am.
Yeah.
I think it's all the same word.
I think it is too.
Just funneled through different cultural modes.
But and I think that's my first thought on having trouble defining one is you can't define one unless you have something. You can't define a singleness, a singularity without something to give it definition.
Thus, you have the two.
Right.
And then once you have the two, they interact.
Oh, gosh. It's so cool.
Yes, and some cultures call it the breaking of the cosmic egg.
Yes.
Or the dividing of heaven and earth, or whatever. Doesn't matter.
Right.
The same concept.
The yin and the yang.
When we realize, oh, there has to be a primordial unity.
Yeah. Yeah. And what does that mean?
And then somehow there's division amongst it.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay. So I think you were insinuating wrapping up, but I got to ask two questions. At least. No, I have at least three questions. The first one is wrapping up all of the massiveness of things that we just talked about. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, do you believe then in a multiverse?
My favorite understanding is what's called the fertile universe theory.
Okay, what's that?
So again, this is one of those weird things that I started thinking about, and then they did an episode on Space-Time about it.
I gotta watch Space-Time.
So if you think about our universe is supposed to have started as a Big Bang.
Yep.
Which is the opposite of a black hole.
Yes.
Everything comes out of it instead of going into it.
Right.
Although it's described the same way. It's a Planck nugget. Planck length.
Yeah.
Nugget of infinite mass or density or whatever. Okay. Weird. Why did it explode?
That's the question that nobody asks.
So you can draw the lines of cause and effect. Now, this assumes that the Big Bang is real, and there's reasons to believe that it is real, at least locally.
Yeah.
Because of the cosmic microwave background radiation. Whatever. Redshift may be, some people argue it's an artifact of energy loss. But say if we combine it with cosmic microwave background, it's pretty clear something exploded.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't the whole universe, it's at least this part of it.
Right.
Well, if you draw the lines of cause and effect back before the Big Bang,
mm-hmm.
you get a collapsing universe into a Planck nugget,
mm-hmm.
which sounds a lot like the creation of a black hole.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this idea that, like, where's all the antimatter? Why do we only have positive matter and not antimatter?
Right.
Because they should be created in equal amounts and annihilate each other.
Equal and opposite.
Guess what? Time reverse matter is also antimatter. Because when you reverse time, you reverse charge.
Yep.
So if we look at the Big Bang as a mirror,
where
there's a mirror universe on the other side, they call this Janus universe theory, because Janus is the god with two heads, two faces. Sorry, two faces, not two heads. But then you can see it as a time reverse universe, and that's where the antimatter is. It's on the other side, moving the other direction.
Oh.
Guess what? we have lots of black holes in our universe.
We have a lot of black holes.
Does that mean they're creating antimatter universes on the other side?
They would imply that, wouldn't it?
So then every universe, every time a black hole forms, is producing a reverse universe within the black hole. But the gravity is so heavy in the black hole that you can't pass through it without moving the speed of light.
Yeah. Jeez.
So when people say like, you know,
Waiter, I'll have another.
Where-
We should have poured some whiskey leading into this.
where are the, you know, UAPs and UFOs coming from? I'd say the vast majority are from government bases.
Yeah.
But the ones that are from off-world, which is how we got the technology probably in the first place, we don't even know if it's from this universe.
Right. No, we don't.
Because
We know
once you
nothing.
have full control over gravity, you can go through wormholes and move through, possibly through black holes, maybe not, but say, you know, theoretically. So then you go like, well, where's any of this from? Or here's another weird story maybe we can hear is like, if there have been many arcs of civilization on Earth
Yeah.
going through these processions of the equinoxes, 25,000 year cycles of civilization rising and declining.
Right.
Who's to say they didn't have a space program in one of those?
Right.
And then maybe they still have underground bases on Earth and they still venture back from the stars periodically.
Yeah. Well, and
And
there's
who knows what path of technological evolution they've taken.
right. Well,
Yeah.
and it circles back to how the hell do you get pyramids?
Well, I'll give you a for instance. Most people talk about, like, especially the Greys communicating
Right.
psychically,
Yeah.
but pretty much any extraterrestrial.
Right. Palladians, Orion.
Well, again, our
Orionians.
AI can already decode our brainwaves.
Right.
So it's not that far of a leap that in 10 years you can just think something at someone and they can hear you.
Well, yeah.
So, and what people usually say is the Greys are some kind of biological android
Right.
hybrid cyborg.
Yep.
And it kind of makes sense because you're like, that's one possible path of evolution.
Right.
Not the path I want to go down, but
No.
you can imagine.
Especially
some
the
people
no
would.
sex organs. That's not the path I want to go down.
Maybe that's the only way to become immortality in the physical.
Then you can kill me and reincarnate me over and over again.
Yes. Yeah,
Uh,
they're the perfect color too, right? Gray.
yeah. Oh gosh. Nasty. Nasty.
But you know, some people say they're just demons.
They do say that too.
I stay agnostic. I've heard
Keep the mystery.
weird stories where people say that praying has stopped an abduction.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So I would say, like,
Invoking the name of Jesus, praying.
whether they are beings from another world or not, there seems to be rules they have to play by.
Yeah.
So words matter,
Well, there we go back to
and what you worship matters.
vibration
So
and
there-
resonance.
Mhm.
It's interesting. All right. You're going to have to come back on because we didn't get into, I mean, we definitely figured out some of what makes David David, but I have a feeling that things like your wife and your newborn also play a role in that. So
Definitely.
we'll touch on that.
Yeah, maybe I get a little too heady sometimes.
No, I love this. This is great. If you had a megaphone and could reach the entire world, what's your message to them?
Find it in your heart to forgive those you love, yourself, and try to expand who you include in that as much as you can, and you'll find yourself living in a greater sense of peace and harmony and love with the world.
It's beautiful.
And it's always a challenge.
Yeah. Yes, it is. But worth it.
Yeah, a worthwhile challenge.
A worthwhile challenge.
Don't give up.
David, this has been fantastic. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
This was a lot of fun. This is great. And there you go. That was awesome.
sometimes